It all began with an ordinary yard sale, but little did I know that a simple detour would unravel into one of the most terrifying chapters of my life. I'm a 31-year-old insurance agent, and after a week spent drowning in endless claims and policy paperwork, my favorite escape is sifting through yard sales and thrift shops. There's something about the forgotten treasures that others discard, pieces with a history waiting to tell their story. But this time, the story found me. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I stumbled upon the sign. A hand-painted arrow pointed toward a modest house with a few items scattered across the driveway. The usual books, kitchen gadgets, and tools. Among the clutter, one item caught my eye. A red, rusted metal toolbox. It wasn't just a toolbox, it was a memory. It reminded me of my grandfather's garage, the scent of motor oil and sawdust clinging to the air. Nostalgia wrapped around me like a comforting old blanket. "How much for this?" I asked the grizzled man running the sale, holding up the weathered box. $10, he replied with a shrug. It felt like a bargain for a piece of the past. We exchanged a few words about old tools, and I drove home with my new treasure, unaware of the Pandora's box I had just opened. For a week, the toolbox sat untouched in my garage, waiting for me to clean it up. Then, one evening, everything changed. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, urgent sound that jolted me from my post-dinner haze. Standing on my porch was a wiry man, probably in his late 40s, with a face that seemed weathered by more than just time. His dark eyes bore into me, unblinking. "You bought a toolbox last week," he said, his voice rough, almost a growl. I hesitated. Yeah, why?" "It's mine," he replied, leaning closer. "Sold by mistake, I need it back." Something about him felt off. His presence was suffocating, his tone demanding. My instincts told me there was more to this than a simple mix-up. "Sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I bought it fair and square. If there's an issue, maybe you should talk to the guy who sold it." He didn't argue. Instead, he locked eyes with me, a promise of trouble in his gaze. "I'll be back." And he was. 2 days later, the pounding on my door woke me from a restless nap. Peering through the peephole, I saw his agitated face. This time he didn't wait for an invitation. "Open up!" he yelled, his fist hammering against the door. "Just give me the toolbox and I'll leave you alone." I stayed silent, my heart racing. His frustration boiled over and I heard the doorknob rattle. That's when fear turned into dread. I hadn't locked it. I bolted it just in time, the sound of the lock clicking into place echoing louder than my racing thoughts. The visits didn't stop. Each time he was angrier, more desperate. He began showing up at odd hours, early morning, late at night, until one evening, his pounding escalated into shoving, as if he were trying to break down the door. That's when I finally called the police. The officers filed a report and advised me to stay cautious. Their words did little to ease my nerves. That night, as I stared at the toolbox in the dim light of my garage, I wondered why it mattered so much to him. Was it sentimental, or was it something more sinister? Curiosity won. I opened the box and carefully examined the tools. Then I noticed the false bottom. My hands trembled as I pried it open, revealing small plastic bags filled with white powder. My breath caught. Drugs. Now it all made sense. He wasn't after the toolbox. He was after his stash. The next morning, I turned the toolbox over to the police. The officer who took my statement commended my decision, but warned me to be vigilant. If this guy knows you have his stash, he might not give up easily. That warning haunted me. When I returned home that evening, the eerie feeling started before I even stepped out of my car. The porch light was off, casting the front of my house in unsettling darkness. Then I saw it. The front door was wide open, the lock shattered. My stomach churned as I called 911 and cautiously stepped inside. My living room was destroyed. Cushions thrown, shelves overturned, papers scattered like confetti. Every room was the same, ransacked, violated. As I moved toward the hallway, I heard footsteps. Then, the back door slammed. I rushed to the window in time to see two shadowy figures disappear into the night. The police arrived shortly after, but the damage was done. Those men had been searching for the stash, oblivious that it was no longer in my possession. The officers promised increased patrols and advised me to install new locks and cameras. Even after taking all precautions, the feeling of being watched never left. The paranoia crept into every corner of my life. A simple yard sale had turned my world upside down. What began as a nostalgic find ended in fear, a chilling reminder that some objects carry more than just memories. There's something unsettling about a mirror that doesn't just reflect you, it watches you. That's exactly how it felt the first time I saw that mirror, leaning against a house at a quiet cul-de-sac yard sale. Its gilded frame, weathered with age, seemed to hold secrets, the intricate carvings of vines and flowers almost alive in the dappled sunlight filtering through a massive oak tree. I didn't know it then, but that mirror would shatter my sense of normalcy and safety. It all started on an otherwise ordinary Saturday. Yard sales had always been my escape, a small joy in rummaging through forgotten relics, imagining the stories they carried. That day, I stumbled upon a sign that read, "Antiques and Vintage Finds." The collection was impressive: dusty books, ornate silverware, vintage cameras. But my eyes kept drifting back to that mirror. Its warped glass distorted the reflection of the world around it, giving everything a ghostly, surreal quality. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like the mirror was calling to me. As I ran my fingers over the frame, a man appeared, wiry, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Admiring the mirror?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of something. Unease, maybe. "Yes," I replied, almost mesmerized. "How much?" He hesitated, his hand resting on the frame like he was guarding it. "Are you sure it's what you're looking for? It's special." That pause, the way he said special, sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off. "I'm sure," I insisted, offering a polite smile. Finally he relented, but not without another odd request. "Let me deliver it, it's heavy." His insistence felt unnecessary, even intrusive, but I didn't want to argue. Later that day, his old pickup truck rolled into my driveway. He carried the mirror inside himself, refusing my help, and placed it against the living room wall with a peculiar care. "It looks good here," he murmured, almost reverently, before lingering a moment too long, his eyes scanning my home like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him, feeling an inexplicable sense of relief. That evening, the mirror transformed the room. Its golden frame glowed in the soft lamplight, and for a while I admired how it brought the space to life. But as the night deepened, an uneasy feeling crept in. The mirror's warped reflection seemed to shift, as if it were watching me instead of the other way around. I told myself it was just my imagination, the product of a long day, and went to bed. The next morning, something else caught my attention. A car. An old blue sedan was parked across the street, its windows darkly tinted. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor. But when the car was still there that afternoon, and then again that evening, unease settled in my chest. Peeking through the curtains, I finally made out the silhouette of a man inside. My heart dropped. It was him, the vendor from the yard sale. Why was he watching my house? Over the next few days, the sedan became a fixture, parked in the same spot for hours. By the fourth day, it moved closer, now right in front of my house. That evening, as I peeked out the window, I saw him staring directly at my living room. My stomach churned with dread. Summoning courage I didn't feel, I stepped outside to confront him. As soon as I approached, he started the car and drove off without a word, the sound of his tires on the pavement echoing like a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, and the mirror, once a beautiful centerpiece, now felt oppressive. Its reflection seemed darker, its presence heavier. I moved it into the garage and covered it with an old sheet, desperate to put some distance between us. The next evening, the nightmare escalated. Headlights flooded my driveway, and I froze. The sedan was back, but this time the man stepped out. My breath caught as he started walking toward the house. Panic surged as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator as I locked every door and window. Through the curtains, I watched him pace the sidewalk, occasionally glancing up at my windows. He didn't try to enter, but his presence was enough to chill me to the bone. When the sound of sirens broke the silence, he bolted back to his car and sped off into the night. The police assured me they'd patrol the area, but the damage was done. I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every parked car became a potential threat. Every noise in the night felt sinister. I brought the mirror back into the house, hoping daylight might diminish its eerie grip. But its presence remained heavy, a constant reminder of the man who seemed tied to it. I never saw him again, but the memory lingers. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. If he was just an eccentric man fixated on me, or if something darker was at play. All I know is that the mirror still feels like it belongs to him, like a tether to something I can't fully understand. Sometimes the things we bring into our lives come with more than we bargained for. There's something inexplicably eerie about old technology. The flicker of a VHS tape rewinding, the static hiss before a movie begins. It's like a ghost of the past coming alive. On weekends, I often retreat into that analog comfort, diving into vintage tapes and consoles. It's a harmless hobby, a nostalgic escape. At least that's what I thought. Until I found it. It started innocently enough. A lazy Saturday morning, wandering through a neighbor's yard sale. The air was warm, the faint hum of cicadas filling the silence as I browsed through dusty boxes and mismatched trinkets. Then I saw it, a weathered cardboard box filled with VHS tapes. $5 for the lot. Nostalgic treasures like E.T., The Goonies, and Back to the Future stared back at me, promising a weekend of feel-good marathons. But nestled at the bottom of the pile, hidden beneath the familiar titles, was an unmarked black tape. Its label had been peeled off, leaving a faint sticky residue, as if someone had deliberately erased its identity. I didn't think much of it then. Curiosity got the better of me. What secrets could this forgotten relic hold? That night, the tape became the grand finale of my marathon. The familiar hum of static greeted me as the screen came to life. What followed seemed ordinary at first. A grainy home video of a family in their living room. A man, a woman, and 2 kids laughing and passing a bowl of popcorn. Their voices were muffled, their movements mundane. I smiled at the simplicity of it. But then something clawed at the edge of my mind, a sense of familiarity. The layout of the room, the wallpaper, the furniture. It felt too familiar. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. My heart stopped. It was my house. The unmistakable layout stared back at me. The couch against the far wall, the chipped mantel above the old fireplace, the small alcove where I kept my bookshelf. Even the faded floral wallpaper matched perfectly. But the video was decades old, long before I ever lived here. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps this was footage of a previous family, someone who had lived here before the elderly couple I'd bought the house from. But something felt off. The family on the tape didn't resemble the photos I'd seen during the house tour, and the way they moved, the way they looked. There was a tension in their laughter, a shadow of unease behind their smiles. The mood shifted. The children glanced nervously off camera, their mother pulling them closer. The father whispered something, his face taut with fear. The camera panned, revealing flickering shadows on the far wall. But they didn't belong to the family. They moved unnaturally, writhing as if alive. Then came the whispers, faint and unintelligible, growing louder as the family huddled together. The screen distorted, static crackling like a scream. And just before the picture cut out, I saw it. A shadow, tall, angular, and impossibly dark. It crossed the frame for a split second. It wasn't like any shadow I'd ever seen. It felt like the absence of light, as if it had been carved out of the world itself. Desperate for answers, I asked an elderly neighbor about the house's history. Their response chilled me. Oh, that family. They left in a hurry, they said, avoiding my eyes. Didn't take much with them. House sat empty for years after. People said. Their voice trailed off. Said what? I pressed. They shook their head. Something wasn't right with that place. Best not to dig too deep. The tape now sits boxed away in my attic, untouched. But the house hasn't let me forget. On quiet nights when the world is still, I hear it. The faint hum of whispers, just like on the tape. And every time I wonder, what if it never left? The chair sat by the bay window like it had always belonged there, its delicate carvings of vines and leaves catching the glow of the setting sun. It was beautiful, yes, but beautiful things can hide terrible secrets. When I first saw the vintage rocking chair at a yard sale, it seemed like a perfect find. The dark wood was worn but sturdy, etched with a craftsmanship you rarely see anymore. How much? I asked, tracing the intricate carvings with my fingertips. The woman running the sale didn't even look up. $20, she muttered, her voice curt and almost hurried. She didn't haggle or try to upsell me on its vintage charm. If anything, she seemed eager, desperate to get rid of it. An antique? I asked, trying to mask my excitement. Her answer was blunt. It's old. Take it or leave it. Her dismissiveness should have raised a red flag, but I was too enchanted by the chair to notice. I handed her the money, loaded it into my car, and drove home, imagining how it would elevate my living room's ambience. By the end of the afternoon, it fit perfectly by the bay window. I draped a soft throw blanket over its back and admired how its dark wood seemed to glow in the fading light. That evening, I settled into the chair with a book and a steaming cup of tea. The wood creaked softly beneath me as I rocked, the motion comforting, almost hypnotic. By 11 p.m., I was in bed, the chair already a cherished addition to my home. But just as I drifted off to sleep, I heard it, a soft creaking, faint but rhythmic. I froze. The sound was unmistakable. The chair was rocking. I told myself it was just the wood settling or maybe a draft. Still, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. The creaking became a nightly ritual, sometimes soft, almost imperceptible, and other times louder, as though someone was pushing it with force. I avoided the living room after dark, but one morning I couldn't avoid the unsettling truth. The chair had moved. It was slight, angled just a few inches toward the window, but I knew I hadn't touched it. I lived alone. There was no one else who could have shifted it. Trying to rationalize the situation, I placed a piece of tape beneath one of its legs to mark its position. If it moved again, I'd know. That night, I woke to the loudest creaking yet. The sound was violent, as though the chair was rocking furiously. Heart pounding, I ran to the living room. The chair was rocking wildly on its own. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice trembling, and it did. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My eyes darted to the tape I'd placed earlier. The chair had shifted inches from its mark. From that moment, the chair wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was an unwelcome guest. The next evening brought something new, whispering. Low, unintelligible murmurs seeped from the living room. As I edged closer, the whispers grew louder, though the words remained just out of reach. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. The whispers stopped. Panic gripped me. I called my friend Anna, desperate for someone to validate what I was experiencing. She arrived 20 minutes later, dismissive at first, until the chair began to creak. Her face went pale. "That's not normal," she whispered. The final straw came 2 nights later. Determined to prove to myself that fear wasn't controlling me, I decided to sleep in the living room. I woke around 3 in the morning to a deafening bang. The chair was slamming against the wall with each violent rock, as though something unseen was forcing it. The throw blanket slipped to the floor, and my instincts screamed for me to run. I grabbed my keys and fled, not stopping until I was in my car with the doors locked. The next morning I dragged the chair to the curb, hastily scribbling "free" on a piece of paper. By evening it was gone, but relief never came. The living room felt emptier, yet the air was heavy, oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something into my home, and that it wasn't entirely gone. Now, whenever I see vintage furniture, I hesitate. I can't help but wonder what history it carries, what lingers unseen beneath its charm. The rocking chair taught me one thing: some treasures come with a price you can't afford to pay.